My name is Doug Vakoch, and I'm the president of METI, an organization dedicated to messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, where we send powerful intentional signals to nearby stars in the hope of getting a reply.
Where did your interest in this subject came from? How did it started for you?
I grew up in the 1960s. And so in the United States, that was a time when we were in the midst of the Apollo space missions to the moon. So I had a very early interest in science and understanding the universe. And at the same time, during the 1960s, astronomers were first starting to use radio telescopes to look for signals from another civilization. So pointing them to other stars, see if there are radio signals coming in from other advanced intelligence that has the ability to communicate. So the idea of exploring space is something I was interested in very early, but the problem is, if you really want to contact intelligence, you can't just get in a spaceship and travel, but you can communicate through sending radio signals. So that was my earliest interest, first in how could we get out into the universe ourselves? And then secondly, how do we do it so we're not just exploring our moon or Mars, but outside of our own solar system to see if we can even find if there's other life out there.
So he's asking you, did you discover something? And do you think we are alone in the universe, like as intelligent people?
You know, so far we haven't discovered anything. So it's been over 60 years now that astronomers have been looking for aliens. And we've looked at a few tens of thousands of stars. I mean, usually when you say, oh, this has been 60 years, the natural reaction is, give up, it's time to quit, because we've already looked and we know they're not there. But that 60 years isn't 60 years continuously, because the big challenge is we need the most powerful radio telescopes to search, and astronomers want to use those for something that they know is out there. You know there are other stars, other galaxies, other nebula to study. So it's difficult to find time on the best telescopes to do the research. So in a sense, I would have been surprised if we would have discovered extraterrestrials already. But are they out there? That I think is the big question. I mean, it's hard to imagine that in our galaxy with 200 or 300 billion stars, and then billions of other galaxies in the universe, that there has to be intelligence out there somewhere. I think the more difficult question is it close enough, and is it interested enough in making contact for us to actually know about them? That I just don't know. So I think that's the uncertainty that we need to live with if we really want to seriously try to find intelligence out there.
So why did you choose these shapes particularly? And
Comme langage, communication avec.
Yes, how did you choose these ones?
You know, the big challenge of communicating with an extraterrestrials, unfortunately, they're not going to speak French or English or Swahili or Chinese. So we have to find a language that both we and the extraterrestrials understand. And so we ask ourselves, what do they have to know for us to make contact? And the one thing we'll have in common is radio. If we send a radio signal and they in common. So then what do you need to know in order to create a radio transmitter? And so you've got to be a very sophisticated engineer. So we ask ourselves, what do you need to know to create this advanced technology? And it seems like you have to know something as basic as a little arithmetic. So if you don't know 2 + 2 = 4, you're not going to be a good engineer on Earth or any other planet. So those are the basic principles that we use, something as simple as addition. And the first message that our organization sent out was in 2017. This was in cooperation with a music festival in Barcelona called Sónar. and they were celebrating their 25th anniversary, and they wanted to do something special and send a message into space. So they wanted to send music into space. They came to METI and said, can you help us create a message that will let the extraterrestrials understand music? So, you know, sometimes here on Earth, we talk about music as being a universal language. We're from a different culture. We don't understand the language, but we still get some sense of music. So we wanted to be able to explain music to an extraterrestrial. And so we used some of those same basic principles like 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, you had mentioned using geometrical shapes, and that's what we did. We actually explained the idea of a triangle. So there's a type of triangle called a right triangle where you have two sides and then the hypotenuse. And there's a basic idea called the Pythagorean theorem. It came from the Greek geometer Pythagoras, that said if you take this length and multiply it by 2, this length and multiply it by itself. I'm sorry. So if this is 3 centimeters and this is 4 centimeters, then 3 centimeters times 3 centimeters, 9, 4 times 4, 16. And this now is, add these two together. 9 + 16 is 25, so it's 5. So simply those three numbers, 3, 4, 5, tell the extraterrestrial we know something about geometry here on Earth. So we send a lot of different examples of this kind of a triangle. And then in order to communicate radio waves are these waves that change over time. And you can describe that radio frequency, that sine wave, simply by the length of one side of the triangle over the other. So it's a little simple division, you know, like 5 divided by 3. Again, the important thing is to stay as simple as we can and as direct as we can. And so what we talked about in that message, you know, it wasn't trying to send all of the collected literature of the world. It was simply to talk about the radio signal itself. The radio signal has a certain frequency. The pulses that we send last a certain time, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. So in this first start of a conversation, we're trying to just say hello in the universal language of mathematics.
Do you have any message to young people who would like to follow their, like, a dream or something, a passion?
Absolutely. I think you have it stated perfectly, which is to follow your dream, follow your passion. And when you do, it's okay that not everyone understands it. That if you're really following your dream and doing something that's important to you, many people may not understand, and that's okay. You know, we all want to be liked by people, and we like other people to think what we're doing is cool and it's good. But if you really want to be true to yourself, realize that there are a lot of people who are going to say, that makes no sense, or I disagree. And that doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're staying true to yourself. So don't be too focused on whether other people agree with you or not. In fact, sometimes getting those disagreements can help you understand, wow, this really does matter to me. And this is something that I can contribute that other people maybe don't think is so important. So it's not important that everyone thinks you're wonderful. Just feel like you're wonderful yourself.
So was it difficult for you, people's opinion and what they were saying about your choices and your work?
Comment il a fait pour, en gros, continuer à faire les choses?
Yes, and how did you do to never give up?
It has been difficult with METI. So this is the messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. As I mentioned, starting in 1960, astronomers were very seriously listening for signals from the stars. But the concern I always had is, what happens if that's exactly what everyone is doing? So everyone is listening, but no one is transmitting. If that's the case, it's going to be a very quiet universe. So my thought is every civilization should also be listening. You know, maybe they're sending us a signal. That's a good thing to do. But every civilization also should send out a message to say that we want to make contact. And there have been people opposed to that for different reasons. Within the SETI community, the main concern is that, well, if we send a signal out, then we have to wait a long time to get a reply. So the nearest star, it would take 4 years for our message to get there, another 4 years to get back. But realistically, there may not be any intelligence at the nearest star. And so we have to send a message to 1,000 stars or 1,000,000 stars. And so that means we maybe need to wait for hundreds or even thousands of years to get a reply back. For a lot of people, that's just too long. And so they thought, no, let's focus on listening for a signal so we could succeed tonight. And so I appreciate that. I understand that. And I think they should continue doing it. But I think it's also important to do the other, to have the more long-term perspective. You know, other people say transmit because the aliens might come here to Earth and destroy us. And, you know, one of the people who said that was Stephen Hawking, a brilliant cosmologist. And who in their right mind wants to tell Stephen Hawking he's wrong? And yet I think he was, because the one point that he missed is that any civilization that has the ability to come to Earth to destroy us already knows we are here. So yes, we're not sending these powerful intentional signals, but even the radio and TV signals that have been going off from Earth from about 100 years, a civilization a bit more advanced than we are could already detect those. So there's no increased risk of exposing ourselves to any civilization who could to Earth to do us harm. I mean, if there's duplicate of Earth technology at some star, they wouldn't yet know that we're here, and sending a powerful message could let them know. But instead, it's the civilizations that are just a couple of hundred years more advanced than we are would already know we're here. And so then some people say, well, why do you even bother to send a message if the advanced civilizations know we're here? And it's a way of resolving a question that the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi asked in 1950. And he said, look, there are billions of stars out there, and if there are aliens living around. And one answer to the Fermi paradox is called the zoo hypothesis, that maybe in fact the aliens are out there, they know we're here, but they're watching us kind of like animals in a zoo. All of a sudden, a zebra turns toward us, looks us in the eye, and starts pounding out a series of prime numbers. It lets us know about the Pythagorean theorem. I'm not going to go down and look at the elephants. I'm going to stay right there with the zebras. And so that's what we're trying to do at METI, is to say to the civilization, okay, maybe you already know we're here, but that's not the only story. The real story is we want to make contact. We want to start an interstellar conversation. But that mindset of taking on a project that will not come to completion for many, many years, you know, if we get a reply back, I'll probably be dead by the time it comes back. That's an unusual mindset for a lot of people who are focused on what can we finish by tonight? What can we finish in the next year? But I think the beauty of science, the beauty of life in general, is we don't all have to do the same thing. We don't all have to have the same values. What can we succeed in a century or in 1,000 years from now?
So Jean-Pierre Petit says that if there is another intelligence, they are watching us, and to him, they will put a signal to humans.
I hope he's right. Yeah. And again, that's something that we could detect perhaps with the SETI program. I think even if the civilizations are out there and that they know that we're here, even if they send us a message, I think there can be an advantage of us sending them a message.
Yeah.
Because even though I'm hopeful that they will understand 2 + 2 = 4, and then how we go to the next more complicated part of our mathematics, ultimately we want to explain what it is to be human. And we want to know what it is to be an extraterrestrial. And so that may be a very difficult sort of thing to understand. My expectation is that if we make contact with another civilization, they may have already contacted many other civilizations. So they've been through this process many times. So if we send them a message, that may give them an understanding of how we describe the world. You know, I think there's something about science that gets at universal truths. I think there really is something about, you know, hydrogen is the most bountiful chemical element in the whole universe. There's something true about that. But the way that humans talk about and describe and communicate the idea of hydrogen may be very different from an extraterrestrial. You know, we hope that if we send them the periodic table of elements, that they'll recognize that pattern. But there are a lot of different ways to describe the same thing. So if we want to really go beyond just knowing that there's someone out there and being able to understand them, the more hints we can give them about how we understand the world, how we describe the world, the better position they'll be in to send us a message that makes sense to us. Because we're very new at this process. We need all the help we can get.
So to you, is it like knowing what is around us that will like help communication? Talking about like what's on Earth and everything?
Yes, it's talking about what's on Earth, what is in space. So maybe we start by talking about the stars. If we send a message to another star system within our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, we have that in common. And so we start by talking about the things that we have in common, the chemical elements that are found throughout the universe. But if the only thing we talk about is what we have in common, what's the point? So instead, we want to use that description of what we both understand to now talk about what's different. For example, once we can describe the structure of our Milky Way galaxy, once we can describe how the planets move around our sun, we have a way of describing objects in motion. And so now we can use that same framework to talk about human beings in motion. If you look at most of the messages that we have sent out, you know, some of them have been on by radio, some of them have been on spacecraft. There are a couple of NASA spacecraft sent out that had a diagram of a man and woman, just sort of an outline engraved on a metal plaque. But it shows the humans standing like this. But that's not how we are. We're dynamic, we move, we engage with one another. So one of the messages we're now developing is, how do you describe the human body in motion? And so I'm working with Dahlia Rawson, one of the leaders of our organization, who is the head of a ballet school in California. And so we're using motion capture technologies where you have lights on various parts of the body that are tracked by a computer to be able to capture these fine movements of a human being in dance as we interact with one another. So we're describing something about the shape of human beings, how we connect with one another, but in order to show that, we're using the same basic language of math and science that we use to describe our solar system and our galaxy. So the key is to find something that we have in common, but then use it to describe something unique. I think the reality is there may be no civilization out there. You know, what we're doing now is we are trying to make contact with a civilization that is much older and much wiser than we are. And that's very difficult for us humans, because whenever we meet a stranger, we want to say, I'm wise, I'm powerful. But if we make contact with another civilization, that's not going to be true. And here's the reality. We have had the technology to communicate with the stars for 100 years. That's how long we've had radio. But if that's the average age of a civilization in our galaxy, then we will never make contact, because our 100 years and 100 years of another civilization in the 13 billion year history of our galaxy, that is like, in the course of a long night, 2 fireflies, each flick on for just a moment. What's the chance it's at exactly the same time? It's 0. So the only way we make contact is if the other civilization has been doing this much, much longer, thousands, millions of years. So that's who we're trying to make contact with. But, and so one way is to simply listen. We keep on listening, but the other is to transmit a message. And then the difficult part, because humans are not a very patient species. But let's imagine what happens if we listen, we transmit messages and then we listen for 100 years, for 1,000 years, and all we get is absolute silence. What do we do then? I think that it's going to take a while, but gradually it's going to seep into our understanding. We're going to comprehend that because we have committed to this project, we have reached out, and now we are patiently waiting, and we do it generation after generation after generation, that over time, we finally have become that long-lived, stable civilization that we've been looking for all along. And so I think if we continue the search for hundreds and thousands of years, and the only thing we discover is ourselves and make our own civilization more stable and able to reach beyond the conflict and the destruction of our environment and each other, I think the entire project will be worth it, even if we're the only intelligent civilization in the entire galaxy.
So the Egyptians maybe were more able to communicate. Maybe it's our, is it more our behavior and the way we communicate, or is it technology?
I think technology is the tool that we need to use. So for example, I mean, there are a lot of myths about how humans have wanted to reach out to the stars. There are around the world stories about humans making contact with other intelligence. As a scientist, you know, those are exciting stories, but I need to know exactly how did they do it? What's the process? So I think in order to make contact, we need a basic technology like a radio, something that can travel between the stars, very brief laser pulses, flashes of light. So we need some way of making contact. And that doesn't mean all civilizations that are intelligent and have a wonderful culture use that. It's just we need that if we're going to make contact. I mean, there could be water worlds with dolphin-like creatures who are creating these great sonatas and symphonies that they can with one another. But if they don't have a radio transmitter, we're never going to know about them because it's going to be a long time before we're able to travel to the stars. So I think we need the technology as the way of making contact. But I think the most important thing is, what do we learn about ourselves in the process? And this is true when we meet one another across cultures here. I mean, we need a way to travel across the ocean by plane or by boat and to meet someone else. But the most important thing is, what do we learn about them? And then what do we learn about ourselves in the process? So I think the most important thing, it's not even to learn about an alien for the sake of an alien. I think sometimes people think, oh, there are going to be these exotic creatures out there. And that's true, but it doesn't mean, even if they're very advanced, that now all of a sudden we take on all of their practices. I don't want to become an alien by searching for them. I want to become more human. And part of what lets us become more human is we have to think of what is there about our way of encountering the universe that's specific to us? You know, we human beings use our eyes, we use our hearing. If you look at how much of our brain is involved with those senses, it's a tremendous amount. So that shapes how we see the world. The very fact that we emphasize vision, we emphasize hearing, means that we have a very precise notion of time. So an object is, there's no coffee cup, now there's a coffee cup, and now the coffee cup is gone. There's a past, a present, a future. It's gone or it's here. But if you're a creature who communicates through a sense of smell, it may not be so obvious. It's kind of like if you walk into an elevator and there's a strong perfume, is that a person who's in there now or someone who just got on the floor before? So even the senses we use to encounter the world can influence how we understand the world. So we talk about 2 + 2 = 4. Those are very distinct numbers. If you're a creature who communicates through a chemical sense, it may be more like a fuzzy mathematics, about 2 plus about 2 equals about 4. So I think the goal is not to understand the true way of understanding the universe, but to understand our way. And when we can, to expand beyond our notions and say, could it be different? And if it is different, how can we begin to understand part of that? And then once we understand a different way of understanding the world, how can we step back and appreciate our own distinctive way?
So you studied psychology, and what did it? How does it help you in your work?
Yeah, I studied clinical psychology. That's what my doctorate is in. And shortly after I finished that, then I moved to the SETI Institute. I did that full time. But I think there is this sense that we need to make a choice in our lives. Do we try to understand the universe around us, or do we focus our activities here on Earth and take care of our environment, take care of one another? And it always seems like you have to make a choice, either explore and understand or be caring. I don't think we need to make the choice. I think, in fact, it's even more human to do both of those things. So even though my main activity is trying to make contact with extraterrestrials, 2 days a week, I see clients in psychotherapy. And so I work with people who are dealing with problems in their lives, how to make sense of their lives, make decisions about their lives, and make their lives better. And a particular focus of mine is, how can we as individuals overcome a lot of the challenges simply to continue existing as a species? How do we face the harsh reality of climate change, of global warming? Because I think when we see something so huge, something that seems so outside of our control, the natural tendency is to avoid it, to shut down, to deny it. But that's not going to solve our problems. So I think the more integrated and more whole our lives can be, the richer our chance. So, you know, when I decided on what degree to get, because I'd been interested in life beyond Earth for a long time, I wasn't sure whether I would actually go on and become a SETI scientist after I became a clinical psychologist, or whether I would do the more traditional work of doing psychotherapy. Ultimately, what I found is that both of those are important to me. So that I want to understand, I want to know better our place in the universe, but I don't have to stop caring for other people in the process. And I think often we present science as this choice. That was a problem with the space missions, the Apollo missions in the 1960s. There was a lot of social unrest. There was the Vietnam world. We had the problems on Earth before we go into space. But one of the most beautiful images that astronauts took was a picture of our Earth from the moon, where we see this fragile blue marble with this very thin atmosphere that really is a reminder of the fragility of our world. So I think that exploration of the world, the outer world, gives us a chance to reflect back on ourselves here on our world. So, you know, I hope to always keep on integrating this exploration. I think some want to explore outside, some want to explore inside. I want to do both.
Would you have an advice to students or younger people to finish a PhD?
Yes. Realize that it is going to be a long process, and that I think the most important thing about a PhD is that it trains you to do research. It trains you to think. So my own research as a clinical psychologist was to understand how the way that a therapist is trained influences what they see when they're working with a client. If you are in a school of thought that has you think of people almost like animals who are being reinforced, their behaviors are being changed, their thoughts are being adapted. You see the world in a very analytical, very empirical, very observational way. When you're trained as a psychologist who understands the deeper meaning of what someone says, you in terms of metaphors and analogies, and so it turns out that people see different things based on what they imagine initially. And so when I did that research for my doctoral dissertation, it was to understand how the training of a therapist influences what they see when they're working with a patient. But it was also a way of thinking of a comparison between how humans see the world and how extraterrestrials see the world. So it became a way of thinking in very concrete human terms about what it might be like for humans to make contact. But I think the most important thing about doing research, about training, and this isn't even just for a doctorate, this is an undergraduate degree, liberal arts degree. It is more important to learn how to think creatively, to keep an open mind, than any particular project or major that you're in, because the world is changing at such an accelerating pace. 20, 30 years from now, you're not going to be doing what you were trained for. So you're being trained to think critically, to be reflective, to be creative, to be caring. So or we can incorporate all those into our educational training, whether it's through a formal degree or something that we learn simply by living in the world. The more adaptable we're going to be as the world continues to change in the coming generations.
So he says, are there other personalities in the science world that you think are interesting or that you met? And what do you think, for example, about the works of Elon Musk?
The world of science is full, the world of science is full of people with really profound and innovative approaches to doing something different. For example, Elon Musk has a tremendous passion to get, and one of the things that is striking to me is sometimes some of the most innovative creators and thinkers have a hard time even recognizing their greatest contributions. So I mentioned that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence began in 1960. That was the work of the astronomer Frank Drake, who pointed a radio telescope to two nearby sun-like stars, and he conducted the first search for extraterrestrials. He was also the same astronomer who sent the most famous message into space in 1974. It was sent from the world's largest radio telescope, and it creates the same example of how we humans can reach out to other worlds in a hope to make contact. So that first project in 1960 was the foundation for SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The second was the foundation for METI, messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. And during the 16 years I was at the SETI Institute, I had a chance to get to know Frank Drake as a colleague. And so I'm just continually astounded by the range of activities that people can do and the decades of their life that they commit to their projects. So to me, it's inspiring to be around scientists like that.
Is there an experience or a story that you would like to share that was important to you?
Sure. You know, I think the whole process of searching for life beyond Earth really emphasizes the importance of dealing with uncertainty and being willing to reach out, being willing to attempt something, even though we don't have a guarantee. I remember Paris is the location for an annual meeting of an international space organization. And so for many years, every March, I would come to Paris. And when I would have some time on my own just to look around the city, I would go to various museums. And one of my favorite places is just to the north of Paris, the Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, which is the largest science museum in Europe. And I remember going there and thinking, wow, this is such a wonderful and inspiring place. Wouldn't it be great someday to actually be able to talk about extraterrestrials here? So it was, I think about 4 years ago that I finally reached out to them and said, you know, we have this new organization called METI. Is there some possibility of us working together? And so over the course of many years, under the leadership of one of our METI members, the vice president of METI, Florence Roland-Saussou, a historian of astronomy, we've developed a collaboration, and it's not something that happened easily. It's not something that happened overnight, but over the course of 4 years now, the Cité des Sciences will soon be opening a planetarium show about the search for life beyond Earth and METI. And so to me, it's a reminder of needing to reach out. You know, I used Google Translate to send an email in my poor version of French, but it was enough to reach out and to make contact. And with enough interest and enough commitment, some things that initially seem like just a fantasy can become a reality. And so this is one of the things, every 2 years, our organization has a meeting in Paris. Even though our headquarters are in San Francisco, Paris is the European center of our activities. So our first workshop was, the title was Qu'est-ce que c'est la vie? What is life? So what is it that fundamentally is true of all life in the universe? Last year, we did a meeting on the Fermi paradox, this whole question of if the aliens are out there, why haven't we made contact? Next year, we're doing a meeting that looks at how different an alien might be from us. So typically when biologists have understood life beyond Earth, they've focused on the kind of life that we could find in spacecraft that go to Mars or other planets or moons in our solar system. So it's simple microbial life. But when we try to make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, it has to be a larger scale life. So we'll be looking at how different can the shape of extraterrestrials be from the shapes we see here on Earth. So those are specific examples of how the idea of how can we make METI an organization that is truly international can become more true by finding other people who have a shared interest, a shared passion, and a desire of working together to make something that neither group, neither individual could do individually. I think that's maybe the most important part to remember about any activity. It's certainly true here at METI, which is what we can do as individuals is quite limited, but what we can do collectively, what we can do in cooperation, what we can do over a long period of time is greater than we can even imagine.
Do you like Paris and France?
Qu'est-ce qu'il aime? Qu'est-ce qu'il aime? Qu'est-ce qu'il
What do
déteste
you
aussi?
like in France, or what do you dislike?
Qu'est-ce qu'il aime pas aussi? Ouais, c'est ça.
It is an odd feeling. It is an odd feeling being in France because I grew up in the Midwest of the United States on a small farm, and so it's odd because it's a very different environment from Paris. But there's something about being in Paris that makes me feel very much at home. And it's difficult to know what it is. I think part of it is the authenticity and caring of the French people. And, you know, Americans do not have a good reputation as tourists in Paris or anywhere in Europe. And it's a well-deserved bad reputation. What occurs to me, though, is there's a real sense of welcoming, and also I think a real sense of authenticity of people in Paris. That there's certainly a warmth and welcoming, but it's I don't know. It's easy sometimes when you meet a stranger for them to be very superficial. I find a very different experience when I'm in Paris. So I don't know exactly why it is. But there's something Yeah, when you know I walk the streets of Paris, there's something that feels it's a very feeling at home.
So the last question, would you like to say thank you to some people who were important to you in your work or
Oh,
anything?
absolutely. Yeah, I think the challenges were very supportive. They didn't always understand exactly what I was doing, but I really got from them a sense of what I want to do, I can accomplish. So I think that has continued to come with me throughout my life. You know, every day I am inspired by my wife, who's an artist. And so we've been married now over 20 years. And so seeing how her creations have developed over the course of time, and just really getting this strong reminder of the way we progress, the way we develop is simply by committing every day and doing what we can a bit each day. And then the many people in our organization, METI, you know, an organization is nothing more than people. And so we have 10 members of our board of directors. We've got an advisory council from over 20 countries, 90 people. And so these are the people who give us a new, fresh perspective, who guide us in what we're doing, and you know, who make this work possible. And then I think too, it's easy to say, oh well, and then along the way, of course, I have obstacles and I have people who disagreed with me. Those people, I think, are sometimes a gift. I'm thinking of the astronomer and science fiction writer David Brin, who has debated me for many years about whether it's wise to transmit or not. And so I've learned a lot from David. And one of the things I've learned is that he's helped me appreciate what it is that I truly believe, even if there are times that we disagree about that. So I think sometimes the people we're thankful for are not just the people who have directly supported us, sometimes who have respectfully opposed us, because they help us understand our own values and they help us see another way of looking at ourselves as well. So, you know, and I could go on and on and on. So those are some of the first people who come to mind for me.